Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to talk about the real cause of atherosclerosis. And I warn you, it's probably not something you're going to hear from the average cardiologist. So, what we see in cardiology is that they're trying to make the atherosclerosis is all about blood lipids and cholesterol, right? They're trying to say that that initiates the process of atherosclerosis. But in this video, you're going to learn that it really starts with a physiologic response of the cells that line the artery wall. So, let's get into it. So most of the time, you'll see images of people depicting, or cartoon images of people predicting what atherosclerosis is, looking something like this, right? Where there's just this stuff growing from the inside of the artery inward, right? However, when you look at AI imaging of CT angiogram data, like this one from Clearly here, it's an example from the company Clearly, you can see that the plaque doesn't just like the artery wall is not just here and the plaque just starts forming on the inside of the artery wall. It actually forms inside the artery wall itself, like both sides, kind of creating this bump inside the artery wall, which expands outside the artery and inside the artery. So it does encroach on the inside lining of the artery, but it's happening in the artery wall itself. And so when it grows like that, yes, eventually it can disrupt blood flow coming down the inside of the artery like this. But I just want to point out that it's not this thing that grows from the inside of the artery wall inward only. It's growing in the middle of the artery wall like this, right? Okay. Now, so how could that happen, right? So research shows that plaque is primarily a clotting tissue. So clotting tissue is just fibrotic clotting tissue. It's the same kind of tissue that if you cut your skin and a scab forms, that's clotting material, right? And so this type of material is forming in the artery walls itself. So why are we getting this blood clotting material in there? Well, the walls of the blood vessels, like the blood supplies for the lining of the artery and the wall and the cells inside the wall of the artery, their blood supply, they need a blood supply too. And that blood supply doesn't come from the blood that's going through the middle of the artery. It comes from what are called the vasa vasorum, which you can see here in this image. These are small arteries that come around and supply the artery wall with blood. But the blood moving through the artery itself is not what supplies those cells with blood, right? So that's very important to note because that's kind of how the system is set up. And so this works quite well with the arteries coming around and supplying the heart with or the artery with blood, the walls of the artery with blood, so that this blood can keep moving. It's not like it's exchanging through the walls of the artery, which everybody thinks that's what's happening. There's things exchanging, this transcytosis, which really only happens if there's damage. However, they get their nutrients from this vasa vasorum. And so this happens quite well, or this works quite well. You know, you can see in this image here, on the left, you can see that there's this normal artery wall with the various layers in the artery wall and the endothelial on the inside, and everything's working nicely there. However, if the inner lining of cells, the endothelia, starts to grow or multiply, which is seen on the right, we're getting this growth of the cells in there. This is what starts to cause issues. Okay, and I'll show you why. So, um, in order for these new cells that start growing in to get a blood supply, then those small vasa vasorum arteries have to start growing new arteries in to supply those new cells with blood. And so anytime the problem here is that anytime that new arteries start to grow, then there's a period of time when they're incomplete. It's kind of like when you're building a house, and there's a period of time when there's no windows and doors on it yet, right? So when that happens, we get blood leaking, right? And so this blood, I mean, these blood vessels are growing right into the intimal layer of the artery wall, and that's where they're going to leak blood. And so they leak blood into there, and when that happens, stagnant, this blood is no longer in a tube moving, and stagnant blood clots. That's what it does, right? If it's not moving very well, it'll start to clot. And so we get this clotting material, not on the inside lining of the artery, but in the artery wall itself, expanding the artery wall like this, right? And so that's pretty much what starts the issue there. So um, it really has nothing to do with anything damaging or penetrating the endothelial layer itself. This is a process that happens when this gets damaged, then something else happens in the artery wall because of the growth of the new blood vessels. And so it's a very different approach to looking at things. However, this begs the question, is what can make those endothelial cells grow, right? And the endothelial cells there's two things that can cause the endothelial cells to grow, and that is direct damage to the lining of the artery. So we get this damage to the structured water, damage to the glycocalyx, and then it'll damage the artery wall. And a damage response creates a proliferative response, a kind of growth and repair healing response, and that creates a proliferation or growth of the endothelial cells. And so when that happens, we get the whole process that happens, creating the vasa vasorum to grow in and leak the blood. However, there's another main way that this can happen, and that is due to either blood flow that's too fast or too slow. There seems to be like a Goldilocks amount of blood flow. But the endothelial walls, they like to feel a certain amount of lateral pressure from the blood on them. And if that lateral pressure is not enough, then they start to the arteries can either start to vasoconstrict, which can cause high blood pressure, or they can start to or they can start to the endothelial cells can start to grow new layers in, trying to encroach on it to maintain that lateral pressure. And this can happen if blood is not moving fast enough. If it's not moving fast enough, then the arteries want to create this kind of restriction here so that the blood starts moving faster, kind of like if you put your thumb over the end of a water hose, it comes out of the hose faster. But also if the blood is moving too fast through the artery, it's going so fast that it's not in the area enough to create the lateral pressure. It's moving too fast through there. And so that's why we can see higher amounts of plaque in arteries from people who are endurance athletes, because they're spending a lot of time exercising with their blood moving very fast, and they're getting this growth of endothelial cells trying to maintain the lateral pressure there. And that growth of endothelial cells can create the vasa vasorum issue, growth of issue, and then we get that plaque forming in the artery wall itself. So there's a few different studies that have shown this, but those are the two main ways that the endothelial cells will start to grow, is direct damage to them, creating a proliferative healing response, and hemodynamic changes. So now the theory is that this plaque forms in there, right? And that that plaque can then rupture, right? So now we have this plaque forming in here, and some of it can rupture into the artery itself, causing this clotting response, and that's what causes heart attacks. However, there's research that shows this is quite a rare occurrence for a plaque rupture to actually cause a heart attack. They happen all the time, but they rarely cause heart attacks, and I discussed that in other videos. But the real reason that having plaque in your arteries increases the risk of heart attack is because it alters flow dynamics, right? So if we have, this bulge into the artery here, we have blood trying to flow past it. It's like a rock in a river, and the water flows past it, it eddies on the other side, and that can create this stagnant blood flow, and that increases the risk of blood clotting. So that's the real reason that increased plaque will increase the amount or the risk of heart attack. It's not to do with the plaque itself and plaque rupturing and that kind of stuff. It has to do with disruption in blood flow, from my perspective, because there are studies that show that exercise mitigates the risk of having plaque in your arteries. Why? Because you're keeping blood moving. But there are other ways to keep blood moving besides moving your body and keeping blood moving. So research has shown that, and I've talked about this in other videos, that there is a layer of structured water next to the artery wall, or there should be anyways, in a healthy artery, that excludes anything that's not it. So the red blood cells, lipoproteins, nothing can touch it, right? And so this layer of structured water does a few things. One, it protects the lining of the artery. So if we want to prevent that endothelial damage from happening, that prevents that proliferation of the endothelial cells that starts the whole process of the vasa vasorum, we want to protect the lining of the artery. And the main way we can do that is maintaining this gel-like structured water on the lining of the artery. The other thing is that this structured water formation has been shown to keep blood moving adequately. They've shown this in animal models. If you build this structured water by using infrared light, that blood flow increases by up to 300%, even after they've stopped the heart from beating in these animal models. So the heart's not beating, and they're creating blood flow by just putting infrared light, building the structured water, and the blood's moving. So if we want adequate blood flow, I would say the Goldilocks amount of blood flow would be from infrared light, building structured water, keeping the blood moving. So not only is that going to prevent the proliferation of the blood of the endothelial cells, that prevents the formation of the plaque in the artery walls. If you do have plaque already, maintaining that blood flow is also going to prevent the clotting risk that's created by the plaque that's already there. So that's how we can mitigate that, is getting enough structured water. So How do we do that? Well, structured water is basically just the energy storage form of the body. And so if you get electrons, energy to your system, then your body's going to build structured water. So the main way, the most effective way to build structured water is to get infrared light exposure. The main source of this is the sun, and that's why this makes sense, because physiologically or historically, evolutionarily, however you want to say it, humans were outside. Just like all life on this planet is outside, and anytime the sun is up, it's 40 to 50% infrared light. So it makes sense that our body would take advantage of this. And when we get infrared light, we build structured water. But we can also use infrared saunas and red and infrared light panels because the average person today, according to the research, spends about 93% of their time either indoors or in an enclosed vehicle in environments that are completely void of infrared light. So that's the first thing that's triggering this epidemic of atherosclerosis is the fact that we are not in environments that build the structured water, protect the arteries, keep the blood moving adequately. Then, in the face of not having that, we've added a bunch of things that damage the lining of the artery, much toxin exposures and chronic stress and processed food diets and things like that are adding a lot of things that can damage the lining of the artery. This oxidative stress and inflammation we all talk about. And then we've also done things that have interfered with the body's ability to heal the lining of the artery. We have this epidemic of type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance, which is why, you don't form new blood vessels very well. So when those new blood vessels are trying to form from the base of vasorum, they don't form very well. So they stay leaky for longer. So we get more plaque in the arteries if we're insulin resistant, which is type 2 diabetes, which is why diabetes is the number one risk factor for heart disease itself. So, and then lastly, we also have disrupted circadian rhythm without getting adequate deep restorative sleep and enough melatonin levels by setting your circadian rhythm. We're really putting the arteries at a disadvantage for healing. So insulin resistance combined with disrupted circadian rhythm from artificial light is a huge thing, a huge issue for why we have this epidemic of cardiovascular disease. So you can see it's much more complicated than just, oh, make your LDL this and that'll prevent heart disease. No, I don't even mention LDL in this whole model. This is a completely different thing that makes sense based on our modern way of life, right? So sunlight is always the best form of infrared light. If you want to build structured water, make this plaque irrelevant, prevent the damage to the lining of the artery, keep blood moving, that kind of thing. We want to get infrared light, and sun is the best form of that. However, we can use saunas and red light panels. And so my favorite sauna is the relaxed far infrared sauna because it emits the most far infrared light of any sauna that I know. So that's one I recommend. Now, there's no such thing as a bad sauna, I would say, as long as it's getting you infrared light. But I like the relaxed sauna because it gives you the most far infrared light. And if you use my discount code Dr. Hussey through the link down in the description of this video, you'll get $100 off that sauna. I also like EMR Tech red and infrared light panels. They can be useful as well. I have a code discount for them as well, so you can use that link down in the description here. But I usually use my sauna maybe 4 to 6 times a week, for about 20 minutes or so. I turn my red light panel on various times. I do it more in the winter though, when I'm just not outside as much. I'm trying to, compensate for the lack of infrared that I'm getting in winter. And there's lots of studies that show that using these devices, red light therapies, or various aspects of sunlight, whether it's UVB or UVA or especially infrared, have very beneficial effects on the lining of the artery. And it's not that those things are going in there and they're creating some beneficial effect to the endothelial cells. If they're building structured water and protecting the endothelial cells, so the endothelial cells can then heal themselves and do what they're supposed to do and make more nitric oxide and all this kind of stuff. So we have to provide that protection. And that's what this infrared light does, which is why all these studies show that they have beneficial effects on the lining of the artery. So if we want to prevent atherosclerosis, I think the main frontline of defense is we got to get infrared light exposure and build that structured water on there, keep that blood moving, even in the face of plaque, so that this other process doesn't happen. And if it has already happened, we keep the blood moving and make the plaque irrelevant. And then other aspects are, prevent the toxin exposure, the heavy metals, the plastics, the herbicides and pesticides, all kinds of stuff. And then we want to maintain metabolic health by eating a whole foods, animal-based, lowish carbohydrate diet, and setting your circadian rhythm to optimize our healing response. And when arteries do get damaged, we want to be able to heal them And if it does happen, we want to have proper kind of a speedy formation of those new vasovasoral blood vessels. So hope you found that useful. If you did and you want to know more, you want to work with me, I work with clients in a 12-week heart health mentorship program. So if you're interested in that, just look at the description, description of this video down there, and there's a link that you can set up a complimentary call with me to discuss what's going on with you and if it's a good fit. So yeah, that's it for this video. Stay healthy out there.